Welcome to another Marketing Minutes episode of MEPS International's Speaking of Steel podcast. Joining me on the settee today is market analyst Ewan Gilfillan. Hi Ewan, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us and bringing your expertise to the table. Today we're going to be summarising the Chinese steel market, which, as I understand it, has undergone quite a volatile period in recent months.
Yeah, so the kind of the big talking point in the MEPS International Steel Review this month was the kind of big drop that we saw in domestic Chinese steel prices. Prices have been going on a downward trend for a number of months anyway, but the month-on-month drop that we assessed was particularly large. Just to give you a bit of context, the domestic Chinese hot rolled coil price now is the lowest it has been since the middle of 2017. So it's been quite a dramatic drop. We've seen drops across all the different product categories of a similar magnitude. So that's having some big, implications in the East Asian steel market, of course.
So in terms of the demand side picture, I guess, which must influence these price changes, what's happening? What are the key factors?
Yeah, so there's kind of three main reasons why the prices have dropped more generally, but the big drop in particular. So last month, there was a conclusion of the Chinese government's so-called third plenum meeting, which is an important meeting where they kind of set their long-term economic vision and policies. So when they completed that meeting and they released a notice about what they had been discussed, and they had some very, very top level kind of announcements that were made, focusing on innovation, green technology, reform of various different industries. But I think that the market kind of digested that information and has kind of come to the conclusion there's not really many kind of firm stimulus packages in place. And so they didn't really see, where is that stimulus going to come from the Chinese to boost the Chinese economy and support the steel sector. There's been the well-publicized, financial difficulties in the construction sector. So data compiled by the National Bureau of Statistics of China showed that, this year, the first 7 months, investment in the real estate sector has fallen by 10%. And the total floor space of buildings under construction is down by 12%. So if you actually look for the full year in 2023, that was already down. So there's actually a continual downward trend of kind of activity in that sector. And so that's, of course, dampen the mood of people in the steel sector. And the third thing is that the manufacturing sector is performing really consistently. So again, the same body releases a manufacturing PMI, or a purchasing managers index. And that number, whether it's above 50 or below 50, kind of indicates if the sector's contracting or getting better. And so for the first 7 months of this year, it's contracted in 5 out of 7 months. And the forecast for August is for the sector to contract again. So, it's really like a lack of demand and not knowing where that stimulus is going to come from is causing, the negative sentiment in the market and causing prices to drop ultimately.
So I'm guessing, such big changes in China will have implications for the entire region as well. What's happening in East Asia at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so China has, a massive effect across the globe anyway, but particularly in East Asia. I mean, it accounts for half the steel production in the world, and that effect is felt even more profoundly in East Asia. Because demand is so low locally, Chinese steelmakers are now exporting a lot of their material. So MEPS released analysis really recently looking at the trade data that's been compiled, and we can see that there's a lot of material being exported from China to South Korea, Vietnam, other countries in Southeast Asia and East Asia. And I think we also saw in Vietnam they've recently announced they're starting an anti-dumping investigation on Chinese origin hot rolled coil entering the country. That should take about a year to complete, but if it's successful, there's going to be anti-dumping measures put in place on Chinese hot rolled coil going into Vietnam. And so there's increasingly a huge volume of material entering other countries. And, that again, it's being exported at extremely cheap prices. We're seeing reports of, Chinese hot rolled coil being quoted at, $500 per ton or below, including freight to Southeast Asia. And so if their trade, defense measures put in different countries, that material will be exported to fewer and fewer number of countries. And that's that's in our conversation with research partners in South Korea, for example, that is a big point of concern because there's no trade defense measures there. So that material could flow into South Korea, it could flow, to other places. And so, I think the availability of cheap material is the kind of the big implication of this. So.
Okay, so I know MEPS produces forecasts, of course. So could you give us a bit of an insight in the forward-looking picture, the outlook for the coming months?
Sure. Yeah. So MEPS produces a 12-month forecast, and we produce that every single month. And so, we've just talked about, Chinese prices are excessively low. We've also seen some, reductions in raw material costs, because steel demand in China isn't, as strong, iron ore costs and coking coal costs are going down. Despite that, even though prices are going down, raw material costs are going down, actually our analysis shows that a lot of steel makers are, very close to break even, and some of them are loss making, and that's clearly unsustainable. So actually what we think is going to happen is that in the short term, we're going to see some modest price rises. That being said, demand is extremely poor. So there's kind of like a ceiling on how far prices can go up. So even though they are making initiatives to put prices up, they're not really going to be able to achieve some of their bigger ambitions to increase prices. Also, we've already spoken a little bit about, China exporting a lot of material. That plentiful availability of cheap Chinese material is also going to place a ceiling because buyers can source the material at very good prices. So again, it limits the ability for, mills in South Korea and Japan and Taiwan to lift their prices. And they're also all looking for the same business because demand in those countries is also relatively weak. So they're all competing over, a very weak market essentially. So ultimately, we think prices are going to operate in a very small range and over the next 12 months. So, yeah. Fantastic.
Ewan, great summary. Just a marketing minutes masterclass there. Thanks for joining me on the sofa. And for those of you watching, please do subscribe to future episodes of not only the MEPS Speaking of Steel podcast, but our marketing minutes reviews going forwards. Thanks ever so much for watching.